Good day, Professor May and classmates. I appreciate your time and attention for the next 15 minutes. Most everyone has seen reports in the news with all the violence happening in the Arabian Gulf nation of Yemen. There have been several hundred people killed and over 1,000 injured. Saudi Arabia has just started an air attack campaign to stop the insurgents' actions. Saudi Arabia has been an ally for the United States for decades. In the last 2 decades, the U.S. has developed a strong support base in the small nation of Qatar, with U.S. Central Command, Army Central Command, and Air Force Central Command all maintaining forward headquarters elements at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The cooperation between the U.S. and the Qatari government continues to strengthen. The combat and violence in the Middle East is not expected to be effectively reduced anytime in the near future. However, not all nations are experiencing this violence firsthand. This presentation may reveal some reasons for this. I hope to take some of your time and discuss the nations of Yemen and Qatar. I will share some general information on each nation and then provide some data on the social movements in both these Islamic states. Wrapping up, the future possibilities and challenges of these nations will be discussed briefly. While both of these nation states are in Southwest Asia and both share a border with Saudi Arabia, they are very different nations. I will highlight some of the differences looking at recent history and religious authority in both nations. After that, we will spend some time to cover the social movements of these states. Let's begin by looking at Yemen. Yemen is at the southern tip of the Middle East, almost touching the Horn of Africa. It is bordered by the Red Sea on the west, the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Aden to the south, Saudi Arabia to the north, and Oman on the east. The southwestern tip of Yemen is very near Djibouti and Somalia in Africa. This information was recovered online at the CIA World Factbook. The U.S. government estimates the population of Yemen to be approximately 25 million. Looking at Yemen's recent history may reveal some reasons why violence is associated with this state. North Yemen separated from the Ottoman Empire in 1918. The country was basically divided into north and south. The British withdrew from what became South Yemen in 1967. Following this, there was some fighting between North and South Yemen, but the two countries unified in the Republic of Yemen in 1990. By 2004, there was some significant fighting in the northwest between the government and the Houthis, which is a Shia minority. After several rounds of fighting, a ceasefire was put in place in early 2010. Qatar has had a very different story. This info on Qatar also came from the internet site for the CIA World Factbook. Qatar is a small nation that is a peninsula in the Persian Gulf, with its only land border being Saudi Arabia to the south. Bahrain is a short distance to the northwest across the Gulf of Bahrain. Qatar is a bit smaller than the U.S. state of Connecticut and is a flat, barren desert that is very hot. I've been there several times, and on more than one occasion I've seen the temperature near 125 degrees. Qatar is also a very rich nation with petroleum and natural gas industries. The population is approximately 2.1 million, but only 13% are considered by the government as part of resident population. Qatar's recent history is a very calm one, especially considering this is an Islamic state in the Middle East. The Al Thani family has ruled Qatar since the mid-1800s. Before that, it was a poor British protectorate known for its successful pearling industry. Qatar later became an independent state with significant oil and natural gas revenues. During the 1980s and early 1990s, the Emir, who had ruled since 1972, crippled the nation's economy by siphoning petroleum revenues. His son, Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani, overthrew his father in a bloodless coup in 1995. Hamad oversaw the creation of the pan-Arab satellite news network Al Jazeera. Qatar became a leader in mediating conflicts in the region. In the 2000s, Qatar resolved its border disputes with Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. As of 2007, oil and natural gas revenues enabled Qatar to attain the highest per capita income in the world. In 2013, Hamad transferred power to his son, Tamim bin Hamad, a peaceful transfer of power rarely seen in the Arab Gulf states. After this short introduction of both states, we will now look at religion. Information from the U.S. Department of State confirms that the dominant religion in Yemen is Muslim. Most of the population is part of the Zaidi order of Shia Islam, are the Safi order of Sunni Islam. With no official stats available, it is estimated that 35% of the population is Shia and 65% is Sunni. There is an unknown number of Ithna Ashura, 12 are Shia, who reside mainly in the north. Groups comprising less than 0.05% of the population include Jews, Baha'is, Hindu, and Christians, many of whom are refugees or temporary foreign residents. The Yemen Constitution declares Islam as the state religion, and Islamic law is the source of legislation. The government also prohibits proselytizing directed at Muslims. The law punishes public ridicule of any religion. The sentence is higher if someone ridicules Islam. Denouncing Islam or converting from Islam to another religion is considered apostasy, which is a capital offense. It's interesting to note that while this is a capital offense, the government doesn't enforce the death penalty. Other interesting points of the Yemen government include the fact that the government doesn't maintain records of any person's religious identity, and there are laws that direct Muslims to marry only Muslims. Now, looking at Qatar. As one would expect, the dominant religion is Muslim at over 77%. Hindu, Indian, and others are approximately 14%. Christians make up about 8.5% of the population. But as pointed out earlier, only 13% of the population is considered resident population. Of the Muslim population, just like in Yemen, the Sunni constitute the greatest majority. The Shia Muslims vary between 5 and 15%. Both Sunni and Shia are practiced open and freely. Other religions are allowed to be worshipped in Qatar. However, it is only in specially designated or private locations. As it is in Yemen and other Islamic states, proselytizing by non-Muslims is prohibited by law. It is interesting that the law doesn't recognize Hinduism, Buddhism, or Baha'i faith. All legislation is based on Islamic law. Now we will look at the social parties in these two countries. There are two large political parties in Yemen, and both drew on Islam as their basis of political platforms in developing their law. I could not find any evidence that anyone other than Muslims were members of Congress. There is the moderate Islamist Islah Party, the dominant member of the Joint Meetings Party Alliance. The Islah Party requires that members be committed to Islamic teachings. The second party is the newly established Salafi political party, Rashad. The Rashad Party requires members to support its conservative Islamist platform. There are also a few members of the small Al-Haq and Al-Ummah parties, and they are followers of the Zaidi Shiite Islam. There are other minor political parties that all claim to be Islamic-based. In the news recently, Yemen has been getting a lot of attention. That is mostly due to the Houthis. During the introduction, I mentioned most of Yemen is Sunni, while the Houthis are an offshoot of Shiite Islam known as Zaydism. You may notice some of the small political parties in Yemen, Al-Haq and Al-Ummah, have these same ideals. According to an article in the New York Times in January 2015, the Houthis are named after their leader, Hassan al-Houthi, that led a revolt in Yemen after the American-led invasion of Iraq. Hussein al-Houthi was killed in 2004. His followers in North Yemen continued to fight until 2010, and there was a ceasefire. We know now the Houthis no longer honor the ceasefire and have attacked the legitimate government of Yemen, kicked out the president, and have taken over the capital. It seems that any social movement in Yemen develops into violence and war. Quite a different perspective when looking at Qatar. Very little information can be found while researching social movements in Qatar. The Qatari leaders allow very limited political liberalization. It seems to work well in Qatar. Some believe that it is because of the immense wealth. Qatar is seen by some Arabic nations as facilitators in uprisings seen in other nations. It appears that Qatar is a very quiet state, managing its issues well, but through Al Jazeera and support in Doha, it may be causing unrest in other Islamic states. The capital, Doha, has supported many of the popular revolutions, particularly in Libya and Syria. It's interesting that the Qatari leaders may be seen as a social movement that impacts all of the Arabic nations. The Qatari monarchy founded the Al Jazeera network in 1995. This news network has proven to be very influential and controversial. It has covered, and some will say supported, or influenced much of the recent unrest in the Arab world. It's interesting that through all of the Arab Spring violence, Qatar did not experience any unrest or violence as seen in the other nations in 2010 and 2011. Now, we've introduced Yemen and Qatar, and we've talked briefly about their history and their types of governments and social movements. What do we think the future may hold? Well, in Yemen, combating terrorism is a priority for the Yemeni people. National Public Radio informs us that until recently, the greater concern for the government of Yemen was ending government corruption, creating jobs, providing good education system, and ensuring that the country does not run out of water. With the Houthis attack and the strategic military wins recently, the Yemeni government has been taken out of power. Saudi Arabia and other Sunni Muslim-led Persian Gulf states believe the Shiite rebels in Yemen are backed by the Shiite state of Iran. The presence of armed Houthi forces in the capital risks more sectarian clashes with the Sunni Muslim extremists from southern Yemen strongholds of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, or AQAP. The AQAP has been a leader in anti-Western violence extremist acts in the name of Al-Qaeda. The USS Cole was attacked in the port of Yemen in October 2000, and the AQAP had carried out that attack. The Sunni-led states of the Gulf have been a proxy fight with Iran. The fighting in Yemen is a reflection of the escalation of violence. Saudi Arabia has launched a full-out air bombing campaign against the Houthis in Yemen. The U.S. is supporting this with bombs and fuel, including air refueling missions. The future of Yemen can only be seen as continued violence, conflict, and fighting, with no stable structure or government in place, improvements in quality of life or for the population, and a reduction in violence can be expected in the foreseeable future. Qatar has a very different perspective. I've been fortunate enough to visit Doha many times, and I've seen Qatar grow and past anything that I would have expected. Al Jazeera continues to grow and televise news around the globe. There's now Al Jazeera America. The Qatari government strives to be a vital link in communications and act as a moderator during international relations. Meetings were held in Doha between Afghan officials, U.S. diplomats, and members of the Taliban from Afghanistan. Everything seems to be going well for this wealthy nation. New construction, business growth is constant. The nation continues to develop its tourism market. Hotels and sporting events improve every year. Qatar is a tourist destination for many that live in European nations, and Qatar caters to these tourists. I can only see continued success for the people and the nation of Qatar. In conclusion, over the past few minutes, we have looked at and discussed the nations of Yemen and Qatar. I hope I've provided some unique information on each of these nations. Yemen and Qatar have very different histories and are in very different places right now with their governments and social movements. While both of these Islamic states are relatively near each other and are separated by Saudi Arabia, their relationships with this strong nation are on different ends of the spectrum. Yemen is currently being bombed by Saudi air forces. Qatar, while not in step with all of Saudi diplomatic goals, is in a state of peace, diplomacy, and development. The future for both of these nations can only be decided by Allah. From what has been seen in both of these nations for the last century, Qatar will have a bright future while Yemen seems to go deeper into a state of disrepair and failure. Thanks to all of you for your time and attention. If there are any questions, I can be reached through my AMU email at roberthodges@mycampus.apus.edu. The last slide is a list of references that were used while developing this presentation. Thanks again for your time. Have a nice day.